Hi folks, I wanted to make a short video to talk a little bit more about the Walk in Their Shoes project because that was one thing that I saw from many folks that they were wanting more information about this assignment, and I think also the Analyzing Psych Research project assignment. So I thought maybe making a video would be better because that way you can open up the video in one window and have Blackboard open in the other. So just in case you haven't done much reading at all on the Walk in Their Shoes project, the place where you will start, of course, is by clicking on Project Information. And then once that opens up, you will go to Walk in Their Shoes. But before we get there, I will draw your attention to a few things. First of all, the project is not supposed to just be a summary of symptoms from the textbook or something like WebMD or Mayo Clinic. Really what it should be is more of a walk in their shoes, meaning you will be using things like blogs, videos, interviews if you have it, to get examples or anecdotes from people who are living with the condition. I'll also emphasize the length of the paper, which is not something you need to worry about just yet, but we're talking about 4 to 5 pages. And also you want to make sure that you have at least 3 different sources. So one of them could be an interview, but the other 2 really do need to be citable resources. All right, so where can you find that information? Well, the best place to go would be right here, the useful blog and chat sites for research. I've downloaded and opened up that document that I just made reference to, and if you haven't looked at it yet, certainly you want to do that right away. So for each of the possible conditions that you might have chosen, I have a list of different sources. Now when I created this list they all worked, but some of them may not work anymore. But the way you can access this is, of course, you can either copy it like that and paste it into the browser window, or you can hover over it and then hit your control button and click on it, and then that website will open up. And if it doesn't, because it didn't for me, you can always right click and then click Open Hyperlink. Alright, so I've opened up one of these sites that I had provided, and this one happens to list a couple different mood and anxiety disorders. So to find out more, I can click on depression. I actually went back and clicked on bipolar disorder since that is one of the assignments. And what it first brings me to is the basic background kinds of information. And this will still be part of your paper, but it should not be the bulk of your paper. So you would use this as sort of the skeletons. Here I have the symptoms, the mania, symptoms of the depression side. And then to get more information, you would want to go to this kind of place, peer support and life stories. And then that opens up more personalized stories from people who are living with this particular condition. And it's this kind of stuff that you would want. So if we look at this right here, in spite of the vicious voice that had set up shop in my brain, somewhere deep in my soul I had a sense that I was good. So that might be a little piece of how bipolar was impacting his sense of self, that he still felt like he was a good person, but that there was this vicious voice talking to him and telling him that he was no good, that was inside of him. Depression, I perceive that as an enemy. And so reading through these blogs and the stories that people are writing about themselves, I think you get a much more vivid picture of what it's like. One of the themes for the paper is to talk about difficulties with therapy or treatment. And so if we look at Mark here, he's talking about hospitalization, electroconvulsive therapy. He's talking about seeing a psychiatrist. And so that's the kind of story or anecdote that you could put into your paper with regards to therapy. So before you really start taking notes, you want to make sure that you have certainly looked over the guidelines and the rubric. And so I've pulled that from Guidelines for the Paper, Walk in Their Shoes Paper Guidelines. I also have some samples, but definitely you want to review the guidelines. And this will give you the information that, sure, you do need a bit of textbook information, the core information about symptoms or definition of the disease, some basic information about what psychiatrists or psychologists recommend for treatment. And this would be the more, what I consider to be boring, straightforward information. But the bulk of your paper really does need to be the information from the person's perspective. So how the symptoms manifest, and then also how does it impact everyday life. And so that's going to be things like this. How has the disorder impacted their work or school? How has it impacted relationships? And how has it impacted the way that they view themselves, their own identity, the way that they talk to themselves in their head, or the way they think about themselves? And then you'll also have a discussion of therapy and treatment from the person's perspective. So rather than saying one of the ways that bipolar disorder is treated is through electroconvulsive therapy, period. You might say that, but then also say, in the case of Mark, he experienced ECT 3 times after being hospitalized, and his thoughts on it were blah, 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 blah. And that really brings ECT and his experience with it much more to life. All right, so this stuff should really be the bulk of your paper, what it's like, all the way up here, symptoms, treatment, how it impacts them. That's going to be the bulk of your paper with just a little bit of information, the dry information. Now, since it may not be obvious that there are 2 pages to these guidelines, I'm not going to read over all of these, but I strongly encourage you to read over them so you better understand how to write the paper. And these things right here are all issues that in the past, when I've graded this assignment, I find myself saying to students quite often. So things like this, make sure you have one piece of research or a person's example in every single paragraph. Make sure you are citing all of your information, even if you're not quoting them. So these are the kinds of issues that students often have, and so I wanted to write this list to try to prevent some of those problems. And then finally, on the 3rd page, there is the grading rubric for the paper. So you can see that, yes, you need factual information, but then you also need personalized examples and anecdotes. You'll also be evaluated on your own ability to give some reflection, your voice to the paper. And then, of course, you'll also be evaluated on the general writing quality, organization, and your ability to use APA format. At this point, what I want to do is to just focus on the notes section, since that is what is due next. I'll make another video, I think, in the future to talk about the actual paper, but at this point, you're really just focusing on the notes. So in week 6, what we'll do is you'll have time to get together with the other people who are covering your same topic, and you can share some of what you learned when you were taking notes. Now, I have up here just this checklist of notes to show you what you're expected to have in your paper as well as in your notes. So these are all of the requirements, examples of symptoms, examples of experiences with therapy. So these are real people's experiences, as well as anecdotes on how it's impacted their life, their work, their relationships, and their sense of who they are. I want to see, or I expect to see, that for each one of these topics, you have an example from your research. Ideally, it would be great to see 2 or 3 examples for each one of these topics. And if you're really dealing with maybe 3 examples in each one of these topics, I think you're probably ready to write your paper. I think if you want to be informed and be able to really engage with your partners on the topic, getting more examples in this area when you turn in this first round of notes is a good idea. But at the minimum, I do expect to see ideally a couple of examples of symptoms and then at least one thing for the rest of these topics. So to show you what I was expecting regarding notes, I went ahead and wrote up some notes for my own topic. So this are notes that I took for borderline personality disorder, which is not anything that anyone was assigned. So I started off with what I was calling that dry, boring textbook kind of stuff because it was necessary. It'll be necessary to give the reader an understanding of the condition, but also, if I'm not familiar with it, certainly I need some of the basic dry textbook information. And then as we get into it, you can see I've tried to organize by topic because that's how you'll organize your paper. And I have made sure to cite all of the comments or quotes that I have. And I just have I did this really quickly. So I just pretty much copied things. Sometimes I paraphrased, sometimes I copied. When you write your actual paper, I will expect you to paraphrase as much as possible and not have big long quotes like this. But for the purpose of notes, it's fine to have big long quotes, as I have here. So I've tried to hit upon all of the key topics for the requirements for the paper and the requirements for the notes. So cutting would be a symptom that they have. Drug use would be another symptom. Sexually acting out, that might be an impact on relationships. And so I've hit upon each of the topics using real-world examples as well as having that dry textbook information. This is, I think this 5 pages of information probably took me about 45 minutes to do. I'm pretty skilled at doing research, so I would expect that it would probably take a student maybe an hour and a half. But still, you can see in an hour and a half, I've gotten almost enough notes to write a pretty detailed, interesting paper. So that's all I'm going to say at this point about the project. I'll do another video later on to talk more about the outline and then ultimately the final paper. But please do during class this week, or send me a text or an email as questions come up. I'm also happy to talk to people on the phone, or certainly meet with you in person if you're feeling a little bit lost or you want some additional help. One final thing I will say is that if that set of resources I gave you doesn't work out, something else you can do is to just search for your own resources. So let's say I have bipolar. I might just type in bipolar blog and see what comes up. And sometimes you have to do a little bit of clicking through to get through to actual blog information. But this would be a blog entry. And all I really had to do was to Google my topic and then the word blog, and I'm here. If you have PTSD as your topic, you type in PTSD blog, and you should be able to get to many different blog options. You could also do the same thing, but type in PTSD survivor video or something like that, and you can probably get some really worthwhile information. So to speak or not to speak about trauma, this would be a survivor's story of their own experience. So again, if you find that my resources aren't working for you, or they just plain aren't working, if they're not working, let me know. But if you're just finding they're not working for you, it should be relatively easy to go ahead and find some additional sources. And if you're struggling with it, please just reach out to me. Even though I say it's easy for me, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be easy for you. So please do reach out to me if you feel like you're starting to bang your head against the wall about something. I really do want to be able to help you with this. In any event, I'm happy to answer your questions, and I look forward to seeing you in class. Bye, folks.